I hear, hey, I'm interested in accepting Bitcoin. I want to use Bitcoin in my business, but my accountant won't like it, or it's going to be too hard. Like, don't let that be the hurdle for you not accepting Bitcoin or using Bitcoin in the way that you think you potentially could.
Welcome to the Business Bitcoinization Show, the show dedicated to helping you enrich your life and grow your business with Bitcoin, the hardest money on planet Earth. I'm your host, Josh Friedeman, and our guest today is Joe Wood, who's the founder of Satoshi Pacioli Accounting Services, a Bitcoin-focused accounting business that helps Bitcoin companies push forward faster. Joe is a licensed CPA with nearly 15 years of experience. He's done everything from auditing to financial reporting to managing a shared services accounting department. He's been a Bitcoiner for several years after going deep down the rabbit hole in 2020. And this is the second interview we've had with Joe. Our last one was back in August. If you want to listen to that, that is linked in the show notes below. Of course, before we get to our interview with Joe, we do have this week's Bitcoin Meetup Spotlight. And this week, it's the Bitcoin Proof of Drink Meetup. The Bitcoin Proof of Drink Meetup is the longest running Bitcoin meetup in Louisiana. Meetups are scheduled for the first Tuesday of each month, and they meet at the Bulldog in Baton Rouge. Whether you're a curious beginner or a seasoned pleb, they have the right level of one-on-one interaction to keep you entertained and informed. Come join them for some of the best Bitcoin discussions that are available in the greater Baton Rouge area. You can find them on Twitter at BTC POD Meetup. And if you don't happen to be in the Baton Rouge area but want to find a Bitcoin meetup near you, I encourage you to download the Oshi app where you can do just that. Now, we're going to get to our interview with Joe right after this. There are dozens of places where you can buy Bitcoin. So where do you go? Well, since the beginning, I've gone to Swan. Swan Bitcoin offers ways for you to make instant buys or to dollar cost average into Bitcoin. And if you're looking to purchase $100,000 or more over time, Swan Private gives you a one-on-one rep who can help you navigate any questions you might have. Maybe you're a business owner looking to give your employees a consistent Bitcoin bonus. If so, Swan's Bitcoin Benefit Plan is your answer. In fact, I can't think of a lot of good reasons not to at least check out Swan. So, to get started, go to swan.com/bizbit. And if you're on the fence about Bitcoin, just trying to learn more, you can download your free copy of Inventing Bitcoin from Swan. People who don't know about Swan are buying this excellent overview of Bitcoin on Amazon right now. But you know about Swan. So go to swan.com/bizbit. Then there's River Financial. River lets you dollar cost average as well and charges zero fees when you do. But there's something else that makes River stand out to me even more: cash flow. If you like your money making money, River's hosted Bitcoin mining service might be just what you're looking for. Through River, you can buy new Bitcoin mining hardware that they'll then run for you. Or you can select a miner that's already up and running and start receiving Bitcoin in as little as 5 days. This is a great option to grow your personal Bitcoin stack, but it can also be part of your IRA or business account. Go to bizbitshow.com/river to get $100 in Bitcoin for every miner you purchase through River. That's bizbitshow.com/river. And last but certainly not least, we have Oshi. If you're looking for a risk-free way to take Bitcoin for a test drive in your business, Oshi is for you. Oshi lets you give your customers cash back in Bitcoin using the Bitcoin Lightning Network. Merchants love the Lightning Network because it provides instant payment settlement and makes chargebacks a thing of the past. It's great for you, but what's in it for the customer? Oshi changes this. With Oshi, you can set up promotions to incentivize customers to pay in Bitcoin. There are zero processing fees, and you only pay the 2.5% platform fee when customers actually make purchases. To see if Oshi's right for you, go to oshi.team/bizbit. Once again, that's oshi.team/bizbit. All those links will be down in the show notes. And now, on to today's interview. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So I like to start off every single interview with a few questions that help us to get to know you a little bit better and give us some insight for our own lives. So you ready for these?
Absolutely.
So the first question I switch up whenever I have someone on for a second time. And the question is this: what is the part of the Bitcoin rabbit hole that you've been going down most recently or been interested in most recently?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's really been trying to focus more on the privacy tools that are out there. Understanding those at a better level. It's one of those things where can be a little bit harder as far as degree of difficulty, and it's a lot easier to download a wallet or buy a hardware wallet, start there. But really understanding the privacy side of things of maybe you're not doing it because you need 100% of your transactions to be hidden or not public, right? But understanding how those things can work and that your transactions don't inherently need to be seen by everyone or know or be tied back to, your personal identity the way we currently have it in the world today. And so trying to learn about those first, try them out. And so that, there are tools out there so that when people do start accepting Bitcoin, using Bitcoin, it's not in a way that is completely able to be completely surveilled the way the current system is.
What's an insight or fact about Bitcoin that you wish everyone understood?
Yeah, I think this is one that probably took a while for me. It's just like, it's kind of a trope, but it's like, it's not really about the price. It's kind of easy to say that after a while, but like, it's either it's going to work and, there's going to be global adoption and the price today is a minuscule amount of what it's going to be ultimately, or it's not going to work for whatever reason. And again, the price doesn't matter, right? So like the key factors of learning about it, understanding it, using it in a proper way, those are much more important. And the price will do whatever it's doing based on that adoption, based on the tools that are getting built in the ecosystem.
What's the Bitcoin resource you most recommend to other people?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is one resource, but I think depending on where you're at, like if you can find a local Bitcoin community that you can learn from in person, there's an element there. The more you can interact with it in real life, I think is very bullish for Bitcoin.
So beyond Bitcoin, what is a tool, resource, or idea that's been helpful to you or your business recently?
Yeah, I mean, for me, really starting Satoshi Pacioli a year ago, it's really been the idea of like, it's kind of that proof of work concept from Bitcoin, but it is really like, you can get your name out there, you can market it as much as you want, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to, when you're doing work for people, do they appreciate it? Is it good? Is it valuable to them? If you do that, if you do it effectively, it will kind of speak for itself, where if they're happy with your services, they're going to tell other people. And so like, that's really been the thing. Like I knew going in doing this, like that was going to be a key factor, but like, it really is self-evident as you kind of go along, as you make more contact. It's less and less from, hey, I found you on Google, and more like, hey, I heard about you from somebody else who used your services. And so that's been really insightful to see.
And now we have our final arbitrary but insightful question, and it's this. As a general life principle, is it better to ask why or why not?
Yeah, this is one I struggle with, I think, going back and forth on it. I think it's one of those things where you're probably better off doing the opposite of what comes naturally to you. And so I'm someone that would probably naturally ask why for a lot of things. And so trying to probably break out of that mold for yourself of, hey, if I'm always asking why, that's great. You'll probably learn a lot of things. Asking why not, for me, is probably a valuable tool there as well to think about what other possibilities are out there that I'm not considering. And so, yeah, I would just probably try to say, be counterintuitive there. Like whatever comes naturally, push against it and do the opposite.
That's a good word right there. Well, Joe, we're here today to talk about Satoshi Pacioli and more importantly, talk about how business owners need to be thinking about Bitcoin when it comes to accounting. So we're just a few weeks outside of peak tax season. Maybe you could share with us about reflections for your work with Satoshi Pacioli across the last year, a little bit more. As you just mentioned, you've been in business for about a year. Some reflections and thoughts, especially coming out of tax season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a couple lessons from tax season, which is like, it's definitely a need right now in the industry. It was, the last couple of months, I picked up more clients than I had, previously in probably the previous like first 8-9 months. And so like, that's an immediate need that everyone has every year, right? It's a building off of that from a resource of, hey, it's one of those things every year that people need. I think coming off of that, a lot of the businesses and individuals I work with had their books in really great shape, and it's really easy to do tax returns based on really clean books. It's a lot more effort and work if you drew in a bunch of cleanup around that time. And so I was fortunate that I was able to work with a bunch of people that were in pretty good shape at that time. And it's one of those things where you kind of know it going in, but it's one of like, it's always easier said than done, right? Of like, hey, I have everything cleaned up by January 15th or January 10th or whatever the case is. But the more you can do that, the more lead time you have is always beneficial from a tax perspective. I mean, it's always interesting to see. I did a bunch of individual returns this year as well, just because that's a bunch of people came to me and that's kind of what they needed. And it's kind of, I think, probably be surprising for most people outside the accounting industry of like, the business return are generally a lot easier to do, just in that they've already been going through this stuff. They have their stuff organized versus the individual. It's like, hey, I got all these tax forms. I don't really know what I'm doing with them. Versus the business is like, they've been doing that all year already. So like a lot of times individual tax returns, you would think they should be simpler, but they can actually end up being a lot more work.
If someone's listening to this right now, they're thinking about beginning to incorporate Bitcoin into what they're doing in their business, what would be your guidance for them, your recommendations for them so that, first of all, they don't have a headache? Second of all, you or whoever their accountant might be doesn't have a headache either?
Probably the best place to start as far as like, hey, you're thinking about it. What are the first steps? I would say really the most important thing is make sure that you have a good system where you're tracking how you're receiving that Bitcoin in. And so there are a bunch of tools out there. I'll just pick IBEX as kind of the one of the big examples right now of like, if you want to plug in IBEX and be able to receive payments through IBEX, they have a great platform for that. And so if you're using them as a tool, they're going to inherently have a whole bunch of data there that you can use to generate your cost basis, funnel that into your accounting system. And so something like that, that's kind of fully custodial, a little bit more expensive, but easy to use, plug into your business. That's kind of probably the easiest plug and play. Whereas you can also get down to more, native Bitcoin where you're running it through something like CPA server, where you're still getting similar data out of it, still being able to track it. But having more work, more management there on the node side and really having to have a little bit more technical knowledge there. And so, if you're a hardcore Bitcoiner, maybe you want to plug right into BTC Pay server, whereas like you're a business, you're interested, you want to be able to accept Bitcoin, maybe IBEX is a better starting point there. And so knowing where you're at in the process is really important. But fundamentally, the question is, are you going to get the data out of that setup so that you can go back and track, I received X amount of Bitcoin, here is the US dollar price at the time. That's what I'm going to need to be able to record, because that, for a while at least now, maybe 10, 20, 30 years from now, we won't do this. But right now, everyone's reporting their taxes in US dollars, right? So you need to have that basis kind of as a fundamental concept when you're doing your taxes at the end of the year.
So how do you keep that basis? Is it just making sure that you know what price you bought it at and you're very clear about that? And then are there any other considerations when it comes to valuing your Bitcoin?
Yeah. So fundamentally it is, you need to know what the price was at the time you received it. And so, if you have a $30 item, like you have X amount of sats for that, right? But you need to know at the time of receiving those sats, hey, it was worth X amount. And then from there, as long as you have that data, when you actually go to tax time, you can use different strategies as far as if you were to go to sell that Bitcoin and realize a gain or loss, you can have adjustments there. And so it may be that I want to just keep it simple and say, I received a Bitcoin, or I received $30 in Bitcoin a year ago. I needed to use that to pay a vendor. I sold that a year later, or I sent it to somebody a year later, and the price varied from $30,000 to $35,000, and so I have that $5,000 gain there. So like, as long as you have that documented, you can always go back and record it. Alternatively, I could say, hey, I'm DCAing and I bought every month, and I want to use the most recent Bitcoin because that's going to have the smallest change between when I bought it and when I used it or I sold it. And so you have options there as far as what you want to do when you're realizing you're a gain or loss. But having the setup there where you can go back, and I have, whether it's you have 10 transactions for the year, you have 10,000 transactions for the year, having that data to go back to is the most important part there.
Could you share with us some of the more interesting conversations you're having, just like themes of conversations as you're talking to business owners, whether they actually are leaders at a Bitcoin focused company or they're just small business owners who are accepting Bitcoin and incorporating it into what they're doing? What are some of the more interesting or exciting types of conversations you're having that are more strategic in nature?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it right now has been interesting in the last couple of months of discussions around, hey, we're a Bitcoin company, but we still have all these fiat liabilities. Like we still are going to keep most of our money in fiat, right? And that, especially if you receive money from VCs or something where you have a certain amount of runway, maybe it's 10 months, maybe it's 20 months, but like you don't want the price to go down at the wrong time and not be able to hit your goals because of that price volatility. But there's been, I think, a little bit of mindset shift in the community of, hey, there's also another risk here if I were to hold 100% or even 90% of my funds in fiat and it happens to be in a bank like Silicon Valley, and if they didn't get bailed out at the last minute there, right? Like there's a whole bunch of risks there that I don't think that even Bitcoiners fully appreciated in the system. And so a mindset there of, hey, maybe we should have, even setting aside the fact that like it's a good store of value and it may go up over time, maybe I should have 20% of my money in Bitcoin, because if everything, in the banking sector collapsed tomorrow, I'd still have 20% that I could bank on, keep on going and figure things out from there. A lot of talk around like, hey, how are we going to make payroll next week if if the banking system's not working, right? And so that was kind of I think an alarmist, extremist position 2, 3, 4 months ago. And now it's something where still unlikely, right? But something that you want to plan for and think about.
That leads me to the question of like industry standards. Do you find that in conversation with other accountants, with other firms, there's beginning to be some like principles when it comes to holding Bitcoin that you would recommend the business owners begin thinking about, or is it too early to have developed something like that?
Yeah, I think it's pretty early for that. I think it's a small market right now where the amount of companies that are holding Bitcoin is still going to be relatively small. And so I think, the percentage of Bitcoin companies that are holding Bitcoin is certainly higher than the broader, business community, right? But like the percentage that you're holding is still going to be relatively small. And, largely they're in a space where they're not the best position to be holding Bitcoin as well, right? A company, I'll just pick Unchained Capital because they just raised a bunch of money, but like someone like them who's more well established and has a more refined business model, they're probably more comfortable holding a bigger portion of their assets in Bitcoin, whereas someone who, just started up, maybe raised $500,000 million, and they're not getting a ton of revenue yet. They're not profitable. Like that's going to be a lot harder for them to hold a sizable portion versus like once you've been around for 2, 3, 4 years, you're bringing in income. Like those businesses are naturally going to be able to hold Bitcoin on your balance sheet in a conservative way a lot easier.
So when it comes to Satoshi Pacioli, what do you see the future being? I'm curious just to know from your perspective as a business owner yourself. One thing that I can say is that you've done an amazing job of getting out there in front of the Bitcoin community, being of service, showing up, having tables, sponsoring different events. But where do you see the future for your business? What are some things you're thinking about for yourself in order for you to grow into whatever you'd like your business to be in the future?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things I've been thinking about, especially, lately. This first year has really been just myself, bringing my experience and expertise to the industry, but really thinking broader than that, and that, my skill set, my experience is limited compared to the full range of what businesses potentially can need out there. And so one of the things I want to do next year, have on the radar, just like really expanding the tax side of things, whether that means bringing on 1 or 2 additional people so that we can more broadly support businesses that want to have tax returns, but also individuals, where I think there's a real need out there. There's probably a gap in the market between, hey, I have a really expensive CPA firm that's always been doing my taxes, and you pay $1,000, and they're doing fine, but they're not Bitcoin native, and they're really expensive. And hey, I took my taxes to H&R Block. I don't really understand them, but they get done, they get filed, and it's not that expensive. I think there's probably a market gap there, especially for Bitcoiners, where they would like to have someone comfortable with Bitcoin native, that could provide them that same level of service or higher than H&R Block, and have a really good value add there, and really, just get out there more in the community so that you're providing more services for Bitcoiners than I would be able to individually of just doing, taxes all the time, but having people uniquely focused on that. And then I think more broadly, just as we look to really what businesses are going to need in the next year, it's been interesting to see in that I've gotten to work with a bunch of different Bitcoin startups, and they're largely at the point now where I'm able to do that because they don't need a ton of attention yet. And so it'll be really interesting to see over the next year, 2 years. I expect a lot of them to grow. And so what does that need? How do I ramp up as far as staffing on my side, so that it aligns with additional needs and resources that they're going to have as they grow? Eventually you get to the point where you just need to hire full-time people. But I think a lot of them are in a situation where that temporary support, that guidance there, I think we can scale up Satoshi Pacioli to the extent that we have kind of a best-in-class expertise where people feel comfortable going to us until they're ready to hire, kind of fill out that full-time staff for their organizations. And so really expanding it just beyond myself, bringing in some really good people, whether that's part-time, full-time, but really looking to meet the needs of these Bitcoin businesses as they grow and support them further.
And so a few questions have come to mind as you've been talking over the last few minutes. The first one is, when you're looking to hire, do you see yourself going to the Bitcoin community and trying to find people who can work for you in that realm? Or is it just finding other people and kind of bringing them into the world of Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would lean towards the first one. My temptation, I think, naturally is to say, I worked with these people in the past. I know they're good, whether they're Bitcoiners or not. Like I'm comfortable with them. And so I think that's a kind of a natural thing to do, but I think you probably limit your pool of talent there. And so looking at the broader Bitcoin space, I think the wealth of talent out there that is focused on Bitcoin, or, would like to focus on Bitcoin if they could, is really pretty large there. And so I'd love to get into the place where it is, hey, I'm a Bitcoiner, I'm doing, whether it's you're a CPA, you're working in tax, you're working in an accounting department somewhere, and I want to get a foot in the industry, like bringing those type of people on, whether it is teaching them more about Bitcoin or teaching them more about accounting, right? I'd love to be in a position where we're focusing more on like, hey, here's all the accounting stuff that maybe I can add value in. And you're teaching me about some Bitcoin stuff that I'm not as familiar with. Like, I think there could be a good back and forth trade-off there.
Sure. And, just to reiterate, like, I feel like you've done an amazing job of building a good brand in the space over the last year or so. So as you're looking to grow, there may be some sense in which other people can say, hey, I can just start my own thing. But to be able to hop into a brand that's already gained trust and to be a part of what you're doing it seems like it would be an easy sell. So the next question is, you mentioned looking to kind of expand out to maybe more personal clients or individual clients. What is a good client for you? Like if someone's listening to this podcast right now, they're thinking, hey, for right now, I'm not, all in on Bitcoin in my business, but I own some Bitcoin. What type of person might find value in reaching out to you for a conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think there'll be around kind of tax time, there's a natural like, hey, I have my taxes for the year. Like anyone who's has their taxes that they're filing themselves, if they're not 100% confident with it, like those people, I would say certainly reach out. We probably can help you out. it's one of those things where I'm an accountant, so it's a little easier for me to say, but like I always did my own taxes where it's like I go through the tax program, mark all the boxes there, right? I feel pretty confident when I'm submitting to the IRS. I'm assuming there's probably a bunch of other people that are doing their taxes where they're generally pretty comfortable with it. The tax software is pretty good, but maybe they would just need a little extra support there. And so like for those people, they're happy to help them out, certainly. I think what I ran into a bunch of this year is like a bunch of individuals in the Bitcoin space. A bunch of them have these side projects that they have going on. And so like you see a ton of that entrepreneurship in the space where I'm primarily an individual. I have a W-2 job, but I also have, this K-1 I got. I have this side business that I need to report on. And so a ton of that I saw this year as far as like Bitcoiners really just having a pretty simple return. But because they are interested, entrepreneurial, like working in the Bitcoin space, selling something for Bitcoin, a ton of that as far as a little bit more complicated tax return than, if you just have a W-2 job and, your taxes should be kind of one page.
And then how about the businesses? First of all, you said in the future, your schedule might get packed out with these businesses as they grow. Your business is scaling along with their business. So you may have your hands full with what you have now. But as you have capacity, what types of businesses would be the best fit for Satoshi Pacioli?
Yeah, what I really try to focus and target people on is, if you're at a point where, you've started up a business, really kind of early stage, even, just to the extent that you need to get QuickBooks set up or, you're starting to think about, your business idea. Like there's probably no time where you're too early as far as, getting set up and working with us. And then I think anyone up to the point where, you're ready to hire a full-time controller. And so you're at that point where, hey, you really need a full-time 40 plus hours a week dedicated person in the trenches. That's a point where, you hire that person, they can add a ton of value to your organization, but they're not going to be cheap. They're going to be expensive. So you're going to be paying a lot out there and commit that to, a third part of your business. And so I think there's a wide gap there between when you need that expertise and when, you're ready to pay $100,000, $200,000, depending on kind of your business and your setup for that type of person. And so really filling that gap from basically, I would say 0 to, that full-time controller CFO person.
So Joe, before we finish up today, do you have any final thoughts for the listeners as a way to just encourage them as they're thinking about how they can accept Bitcoin in their business?
If you're a Bitcoiner, you probably are familiar with a lot of the services out there as far as what's available. But if you're not, if you're trying to kind of just learn, if you stumbled upon this as far as like, hey, I'm interested in Bitcoin, I have a business, I'd love to be able to accept Bitcoin, but I don't know where to start. Reach out to us. We can get you started there. And then I think probably more importantly, get you in and contacted with all these different services. There's a whole bunch of options out there right now. And I would always try to say from an accounting standpoint, like I hear, hey, I'm interested in accepting Bitcoin. I want to use Bitcoin in my business, but my accountant won't like it or it's going to be too hard. Like, don't let that be the hurdle for you not kind of accepting Bitcoin or using Bitcoin in the way that you think you potentially could.
And where can people go to find out more about you and Satoshi Pacioli?
SatoshiPacioli.com, Satoshi Pacioli on Twitter. Those are probably the two best places. So those, you'll definitely get in touch with me, either one of those. You can also, I'll do a plug for BitList right now because there's a whole bunch of services on there. I'm on there as well. So tax, legal, a whole bunch of other services that you might have more locally. Check out bitlist.com. And that's just a great avenue if you're looking to do work with other Bitcoiners, people that accept Bitcoin for payment. I would say go there as well.
Great. All right. Well, Joe, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
Well, friends, it's a wrap. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Business Bitcoinization Show. If you want to reach out to either me or Joe, you can find our links down in the show notes. And if you're looking for some support in accepting Bitcoin in your business, consider Satoshi Pacioli Accounting. As always, keep building, keep growing, and until next time, keep living and leading well.